Hi everyone and welcome to another video. In my documentary about Air Transat 236, I told you about the longest glide of an airliner without engines. Today I'm going to show you a similar incident which also led to an unpowered glide of an airliner, the case of Air Canada 143, which became also known as the Gimli Glider. I'm going to show you how this unpowered airliner almost ruined a car racing show. If you liked the video, please subscribe for weekly aviation videos. Welcome to Airspace. On July 23, 1983, Air Canada Flight 143 was cruising at 41,000 feet, flying from Montreal to Edmonton. The flight was led by 48-year-old Captain Robert Pearson, a highly experienced former fighter pilot, and First Officer Maurice Quintal, age 36. Suddenly, a warning in the cockpit sounded, indicating a problem with a fuel pump in the left wing. The pilots assumed it had failed and shut the pump off. Since fuel is stored higher than the engine can also be fed just by gravity, with some minor limitations. Just a few moments later, the same warning sounded again, this time indicating problems with the right fuel system. This led the pilots to believe that something was really wrong with their plane, and they began to begin the diversion to Winnipeg. Soon after, the left engine failed and the pilots started to prepare for an approach with one engine inoperative. Meanwhile, they tried to restart the engine. They could not even finish the checklist before the second engine failed as well. With nothing powering the aircraft's electrical generators anymore, the cockpit went dark and silent for a moment, and on the cockpit voice recorder, the captain's exclamation of the F word can clearly be heard. Fortunately, in such a case, the ram air turbine of the aircraft deploys automatically after a few seconds. This is a small propeller that is driven by the airstream around the aircraft, providing emergency electric and hydraulic power. The pilots leafed through their checklist to find a checklist for unpowered flight, but found themselves in a situation that was never expected to happen and was not trained in any simulator exercise. Hence, no such checklist existed. The captain then guessed their speed for best glide angle, and the first officer proceeded to calculate their gliding angle. He determined that they would not make it to Winnipeg. At this point, the captain suggested attempting to land at his former Air Force base, which he saw below, Gimli Airport. The pilot suggested this to air traffic control, who then provided directions for them. Unknown to the control and the pilots was the fact that the Air Force base at Gimli had been decommissioned years ago, and the facility had been converted to a racetrack complex. While the aircraft was descending rapidly, the crew lowered the landing gear by gravity since the hydraulic system did not work normally anymore. The two main landing gear struts locked in place, but the nose gear did not do so. While approaching the runway, Captain Pearson realized that he was still too high and too fast for the approach. Like the crew of Air Transat 236, they thought about flying a 360 turn to lose altitude, but found themselves to be just too low for that already. Instead, Pearson opted to fly a so-called forward slip, a maneuver that is usually never flown with commercial airliners, but is commonly used when flying gliders. To execute this, one must apply force on the rudder in one direction and ailerons to the other side, leading to cross controls. The aircraft then flies in a straight descending line, but leans in at an angle. The fuselage provides a large amount of drag in that state, increasing the plane's sink rate. Thanks to this, the captain was able to fly the aircraft on an ideal path to the touchdown zone. Approaching the runway, he only realized late that there was a motor show taking place at the far end of the runway. The captain later remarked seeing two boys on bicycles just 300 meters away from the projected point of touchdown, and said he could see the look of fear in their eyes as they realized that there was an airliner bearing down on them. But they were able to escape in time. Many of the visitors of the motor show only realized very late what was happening, since the plane made virtually no sound during the approach. After touchdown, the captain applied full emergency brakes. The nose of the aircraft slammed into the ground without the nose wheel extended, providing additional braking force. The aircraft came to a full stop just about 30 meters short of some campers and tents belonging to the attendees of the motor show. The aircraft was evacuated and nobody was seriously injured in the incident. The investigation that followed soon found out that the plane had run out of fuel as the plane's tank were completely dry. But how could this happen? The investigation found no signs of a fuel leak. At the time, the accident plane, the 767, was one of the most modern planes around, and the plane type had only just been introduced at Air Canada. The use of more sophisticated avionics and flight computers made it one of the first airliners to be operated without a flight engineer sitting behind the pilots, monitoring the systems and engines. Therefore, the entry and monitoring of fuel quantities was no longer up to the flight engineer, but to the pilot. To understand the problems that led to the unpowered glide, we must go back a day before the accident. During a routine inspection on that day, a maintenance engineer found that the fuel gauges of the aircraft were not showing any values. This system consists of two computers monitoring the fuel quantity simultaneously and then cross-checking with each other to see if they are in agreement. If they don't compute the same values, no fuel quantity is displayed. To fix this, it was permitted to shut off one of the computers, leaving the system with just one computer doing the calculation and display the fuel quantity. Since this is a loss of redundancy, ground crews had to also check with measuring sticks if the indicated fuel quantity matched with the displayed values. This was done correctly by the maintenance engineer and the system worked properly for the day before the accident. However, before the accident flight, another engineer was assigned to cross-check the fuel quantity indicated by the single remaining system and the stick measurement. When he entered the cockpit, he found the work his colleague had done the day before confusing and not in line with his knowledge. He tried to rectify the error in the fuel system and while doing so, reactivated the second fuel channel. The fuel indications were now blank again. Seeing this, he was not satisfied and decided the computers had to be replaced. However, no spare part was available and it was decided to fly again with one channel inoperative. When the engineer wanted to undo his changes, the fueler entered the cockpit and the engineer got distracted, which led to him forgetting to deactivate one of the fuel channels again, and so the fuel gauges remained inoperative. Moments later, Captain Pearson entered the cockpit. He consulted the plane's manuals and found out that the aircraft was not allowed to fly in that condition. Concerned, he talked to the engineer, who assured him that the maintenance department had checked the plane and it was indeed legal to fly in that condition. With that out of the way, the crew now determined the fuel load for their flight and found it to be 20,300 kilograms. This information was then passed on to the ground crew, who was informed that the plane still contained some 7,600 liters of fuel. To match these two values, the fueler had to convert the measurements from kilograms to liters. However, at the time, most airlines in Northern America used to provide their fuel loads in pounds. The fueler then used the wrong coefficient to calculate the fuel load. He refueled the plane to a fuel load of 22,300 pounds, not kilograms, which was just about half the required fuel load. When the cockpit crew rechecked the fuel values, they made the exact same mistake, not discovering the error of the fueler. Normally, the flight management system would have been the last line of defense, showing that the loaded fuel quantity was insufficient to reach the intended destination. However, since the fuel gauges were rendered inoperative, they did not send any information to the flight management system, and the cockpit crew had to enter the fuel load of 22,300 kilograms by hand, which led to the system believing enough fuel was loaded for the trip. This chain of events led to an airliner carrying 69 people running out of fuel somewhere in the skies of southern Canada. Captain Pearson was first commended for his flying skills, but later temporarily demoted to first officer for his mistake. The first officer and the mechanics concerned were temporarily suspended as well. After appealing to Air Canada, Captain Pearson and the first officer were reinstated and both flew until the regular end of their career. The accident aircraft was repaired and was able to be flown out of Gimli already 2 days later. It continued to fly for Air Canada until it was eventually retired in 2008 after 25 years of service. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, please subscribe if you think I earned it. Next week we are going to take a look at the eerie case of Helios 522, a ghost plane. See you in the next one.